Hello everyone and welcome on FitnessLogik Radio. I'm your host Nevin Barnet, and on today's podcast I have the pleasure to welcome Carl Baxter. I met Carl through Prescript and I've been exchanging knowledge with him over the last few months. He's currently studying to become a certified physio, but already has a lot of experience and an incredible vision when it comes to body movement. I'm really happy he accepted to do the podcast today because I truly think he has a lot to share when it comes to rehabilitation and reaching your goals pain-free. I can say he has definitely helped me on my journey, and I'm sure this podcast will help you on yours. Enjoy. Why would people not have this mobility or lose the mobility? Is it because of lifestyle? Is it just like something you're born with?
Yeah, so literally, like, if you don't use it, you lose it. Right? So when you're a kid, you have like unlimited mobility, if you will. Right? And then like as you mature, you pretty much still have that mobility, and then like you start to sit more because of our lifestyle, right? You start to not put your hands over your head ever. You start to not move around. And then your body's smart. It's like, oh, like I don't need this range because I never use it. So it just says like, oh, like it's okay. We don't need this range. We don't need to have it, right? And then when you try to go into that range after sitting for your whole life because you're an office worker, right? Your brain thinks like, oh wow, this is weird. Like we haven't done this in so long. What are you doing? Like this might be unsafe. Yeah. So the good thing is we lose mobility at a very, very, very slow rate compared to the rate we can gain or regain that mobility, right? So a 20-minute session where you're going through your full active range 1 or 2 times a week, if it's structured well, can like mitigate the effects of my 9 to 5 where I sit at a desk, right? Or even improve on my mobility.
Do you think that bodybuilding is gonna ask us to make some compromises on mobility at one point? Or again, if we just like work on all our ranges, on our mobility in general, we can get as big as we want and still retain absolutely full mobility without any compromises?
I would say probably for all of your listeners, for most people, if we have a well-structured program, we can keep all of our mobility while making all of the gains that we ever want.
So could you give us some example on what you would call, in that sense, a good structured program and a bad structured program in someone who, again, is looking for aesthetics and looking good, but at the same time doesn't want to sacrifice the fact that he still wants to move, and if he wants to play tennis with his friends, he doesn't want to feel like all broken up after like one set?
Yeah, so same way that if we switch our physio conversation over to now the gym / bodybuilding, right? So we have things that take away mobility, right? Which would be our sitting in our desk worker analogy, right? And then we have things that instill mobility, which would be like our mobility exercises, right? We switch that to our bodybuilding context. We have things that take away mobility, which would be our very heavy sets, right? Our bilateral exercise, so using both legs or both arms at one time, right? Those things are going to take away mobility so that we can get a strength or size adaptation, which is good. That's what we want, right? And then things like alternating exercises, single arm exercises, right? Exercises where we're going slower in higher reps, right? Those things are going to increase our mobility. Like we talked about before, we can instill mobility a lot easier than we lose it. So in terms of a percentage of these things, I spend 70% of my time doing the normal workouts that I would do. I spend 30% of my time doing workouts that still get me to my goal, but I have a little bit of change so that I instill more mobility that I'm losing with my main exercises. right? So
And
I'll give an example.
And that's a general pattern that you see a lot. A lot of gym goers are going to go all out on bilateral exercise only because they can move more weight, so their ego is happy, it takes less time, etc., etc.
Exactly, right? And most people will just do all bilateral exercises for so long that we lose so much mobility, and then now all of a sudden we're what would be injured, right? Like you just have no active range, and now you're trying to train in a range that you just don't have, and then people come to me and they're like, "Hey, I hurt everywhere." And I'm like, "Well, we're just going to change a little bit, and then you can move again and do the exact same things."
What's the place of breathing, you think, into strength training? How important is it? Is it something that you implement when you coach people? Is it something you implement to yourself? How can people kind of benefit from it?
Yeah, so I think when we talk about breathing, we need to differentiate between two things, that being ventilation and respiration. Which are two terms that are usually used interchangeably, which are two very different things, right? So ventilation would be physical air getting into my lungs. How much air can I get in and out of my lungs, and how can I move my skeleton as I get that air in, right? Respiration would be like the chemical process of actually the oxygen diffusing and getting to the muscles that I want.
Some of my clients who have kind of a long experience in the gym and who are, for example, competitors and with a lot of muscle mass, they have the tendency to breathe a lot through their belly and actually have a rib cage that doesn't move so much. Is this something that you could potentially, and again, having kind of issues mainly with their shoulders, mainly with overhead movements that are inexistent because they can't really do it anymore. Is it something that you could counteract long term by restoring different breathing patterns?
Yes, 100%. So when I talk about those that 30% of my workouts are things that instill range of motion, right? Something, I'll give an example. It would be like a skull crusher where your feet are up on the bench and you're lying down, right? So with that skull crusher, with my feet up, I'm now stacking my rib cage over my pelvis so that when I breathe air in, I can get a deeper breath. When I breathe air out, I can get all the air out that I can so that I can squeeze my obliques and kind of hold that nice position so that my next breath in will actually move my rib cage, right? So the people you're talking about, we imagine we have a rib cage that doesn't move, and we breathe in and it can't move, and the pelvic diaphragm can't descend because the pelvis and rib cage aren't stacked. The air has one place to go, and it pushes out their stomach, right? Because as I breathe in, my abs and obliques have to relax, right? As I breathe out, they kind of squeeze to push the air out if I'm taking a deep breath, right? So by controlling where the air is going, right? Hey, put you in this position, squeeze your abs a little bit on the exhale, keep that squeeze. Now just do an alternating skull crusher, get a nice tricep pump, but breathe in through your nose and out your mouth so the air moves your rib cage. Now my rib cage is actually moving. I've done pretty much the same exercise I was going to do, which would be skull crusher on a bench, but now I'm instilling some more range of motion, some more rib cage variability, and I feel great after.
Where would you implement that kind of exercise? Like a primer at the beginning of your workout, or more at the end to basically work on these 30% of other exercise which are not going in those range of motions, which are taking away some mobility?
Yeah, so, well, I'll put it in context of like probably the two populations that we're speaking to, right? The strength athlete or the physique athlete, right? So if I'm a power lifter or bodybuilder, right, I have I'd probably skip my warm-up, but in my analogy, I have a warm-up, That's where we're doing these things. We're getting us more range of motion, right? Then we're doing our main lifts, where we're likely taking away range of motion for the adaptation that we want, strength or size. We're doing some heavier accessories, right? Or secondary lifts, where we're likely taking away some range of motion because we're still pretty heavy. And then at the end of the workout, right, we're doing more accessories, but those accessories are lighter. They can still elicit the same adaptation in terms of hypertrophy because you're so tired from the workout, right? They're relatively lighter, higher rep range. Now we modulate positions and cues to now instill back the range of motion we lost in the workout, and or instill range of motion that we might need for the next day, right? So it's like a sandwich, right? The bread would be where we're getting more range of motion, we're making you move better, right? The meat is like your main lifts, and then like the lettuce and condiments are like your accessory lifts.
Is there like something like too much warm up?
Yeah, I would say so. If one, like time wise, it takes a long time to warm up. If you warm up for a long time and then have to do your whole workout, like you're in the gym for a long time, that's not ideal, right? With you warming up for a long time, we're likely instilling too much range that we now have to stabilize into, and then we're less stable in those ranges, so we can thus produce less force, thus get less adaptation out of your actual workouts, right? So we want to, like, say we have half range. I don't want to warm up to full range and then train in full range, because like that's a range that's going to be so unstable because it's so far away from where I was stable. I'm not going to be able to produce a ton of force, right? So if I have half range, maybe I warm up and my main lift is an incline press and then a flat press, not an overhead press, right? So you warming up a long time probably is just putting you in positions where you're so far away from super stable that you just can't produce as much force, can't get the adaptations that you really want, right? So that's when things like the retest that I talked about can come in really handy, right? So you come into your workout.
If you want to know what Carl answered to this question and listen to the rest of this amazing conversation, just go to your usual podcast platform. All the links to FitnessLogik Radio are available just below. On this podcast, I guide you out of frustration by explaining you how your body actually works so you can get and live in the body you've always dreamed of. Enjoy.